As I sat in the stands in Munich and watched the parade of non-American champions in the track events above 800 meters, several things went through my mind. First, I was disappointed at not seeing Steve Prefontaine do better in the 5,000 meters. I was most disappointed because I felt his missing a medal was not really his fault. He was victimized by the same shortcoming as most American distance runners. He simply did not have a kick to tack on the end of his race. The only American to run well in a track event above 400 meters was Dave Waddle, and he runs like the Europeans and Africans. He had a great kick on the end of his race. After reviewing the Olympic results, I became convinced that the real trouble with American middle and long-distance runners is that they do not have a kick. Any doubts I may have had were dispelled when I saw Mert Yifter of Ethiopia run in the US-Africa meet of 1973. In the 5,000, Yifter sprinted a final lap of 54.3. He came back the next day and covered his last 200 meters of the 10,000 in an amazing 23.6. Two things impressed me about Yifter's 10,000 performance. First, he ran this fast in 85-degree heat, after covering about 9 miles in less than 24 hours. Second, his time for the last 200 was faster than the final half lap of the 400-meter runners who competed there. Many who witnessed this were duly impressed for the moment. But as people often do, they chalked his performance up to things like talent, race, or something else which is really only tangentially relevant. Very few people have delved deeply enough into the actual development of a kick. Rather, we accept the fact that some people have it and others do not. The rationalization goes, the secret is obviously in the genes and chromosomes. Therefore, it is less productive to work to develop a kick than it is to try to do what Frank Shorter did in the marathon: simply set a blistering pace and keep it until your opponents die. Of these two styles, the run with the pack and kick method, and the run away from the pack, hold off the kick method, I would choose the kicking tactic. The reason is that I feel competitive running can and should be fun. The more events you can compete in and do well in, the greater the returns from the true value of the sport. The kicking method allows for competition in more events, therefore increasing the pleasure from the sport. An athlete who is going to put out a hard effort over the last quarter of the event is really only getting psyched for and exerting himself over that portion of the race. A real problem for some runners is that they view their event as a totality. For example, many who run the mile are overly awed by the concept mile. They see themselves doing battle for 4 laps. But with the kick syndrome firmly embedded, they have to concern themselves only with the last lap, letting the first 3 take care of themselves. The getting up for 1 lap is infinitely less taxing than getting up for a mile. This ability to relax and flow with the pace for 3/4 of the event and sprint at the end allows for much more doubling in major competitions like the Olympics, where multiple races are necessary. That is why the Africans are able to do so well in several events. With the exception of Philbert Bailly, they move with the pace and sprint at the end. One reason for this is that the Africans have not been restrained in their training with a lot of controlled interval work. They build up a good strength reservoir, then run to win, employing only the psychic and physical energy necessary to get the job done, which usually means pulling the ripcord with less than a lap to go. Americans, however, are held back because of an overconcern with pace and a mechanical method of preparing for racing. I recently read the advice that it takes more than 10 days to recover from an all-out effort at a mile or 2 miles. This is only true because of the psychophysical strains we place on ourselves as we try to cover these distances in good times. The Africans seem to be able to do comparable and better times with a minimum of recovery problems because they do not exert maximum effort or worry for the entire distance. No one is about to maintain that a runner needs 10 or more days to recover from a 54 seconds quarter. I already hear some saying, but the Africans have all of that natural talent and have the speed to kick. Again, we are relying on the genes and chromosomes excuse to exempt us from developing a program which provides distance runners with a competitive kick at the end of their races. He finds he doesn't do very well at speed workouts, convinces himself that he does not like them and that they are not that necessary. Speed work takes on a very low profile in the training schedule. This compounds itself because the fewer speed workouts done, the less well the runner is able to do them, thus the reluctance to subject himself to them again. Then the runner will come up after a race and say, "Coach, I have no speed." Assuming there is a psychological barrier to developing a kick, we must also realize there are certain physical concerns and restraints, and ways of overcoming them. Let me illustrate with an example. Some years ago, I coached Martin McGrady, indoor record holder for 600 yards. That year, in a 3-week period, he broke the world record mark 4 times. His ability to do so was based on an approach we took to the race. The first thing we did was work out a simple strategy that would put him in the most positive frame of mind. We knew that the most difficult part of the race would be a fast last lap, so we worked his training around this. We wanted to create a situation that would give him absolute confidence, even arrogance, that he could run the last 160 yards in 19 seconds no matter what. We did this through what I call simulation. We tried to anticipate the different kinds of fatigue a runner experiences and had him run the target time at all different levels of fatigue. For example, he would run a 4:35 mile, jog one lap on the 160-yard track, run 19 seconds for a lap, jog another lap, hit 19 seconds, jog 2 laps, hit 19 seconds, jog 2 laps and hit 19 seconds. On another day, he would sprint 220s until he had the locking up sensation one gets from sprinting, then he repeated the sequence of one-lappers. Other days, we would break him down with a 600 and 112 and have him run the one-lappers. Finally, it came time to put all this work and theory on the line. The first quarter of the race was a fast 48.5, the last lap 19.1. McGrady lowered the world record to 1 minute 7.6 seconds. The point I want to make is that McGrady was able to function at this level because he was never put in a situation where he had to concern himself with a myriad of things at once. We simply broke the race down into its component parts and he took on only what he could handle at a given time, always building toward an established and realistic goal. In the end, he was sublimely confident because he had simulated his finish so many times in practice. Admittedly, McGrady was a sprinter. So let me develop the theory through another experience with a longer distance runner, this one a female. Robin Campbell came to me as a 9-year-old. At 13, she ran a special 500-meter race at the Olympic trials and won it. The next night, she came back and won the 200. In 3 successive years of indoor competition against the Soviets, she has been victorious at 3 different distances. She has won national titles from the 440 through cross-country. But her most impressive effort came in the 1974 Indoor National Championships. Robin came down with a severe throat infection and had to rest for 2 weeks before the nationals. When she would run in the dry indoor air, her throat would close up and seriously inhibit her breathing. She was finally given clearance by her doctor to compete in the meet, and we decided the best event for her would be the mile. It would be a race without heats, and she would only have to put out a hard effort for the last lap after following the pace for the first 10 laps. About midway through the race, I noticed that Robin was laboring to maintain the pace. There was a high-pitched screeching to her breathing which told me her throat had closed up. I yelled for her to stop if she couldn't keep up. The next lap around, I yelled the same thing. The next lap, I urged her to drop out. Although she was slowly losing ground on the leaders, she remained in the race. Then as Robin approached the last lap, she began to move as she had done so many times in practice, building herself up for that final surge. At the gun, she began to sprint, going wide of the pack, racing down the backstretch, passing people in the process, generating more speed and strength with each stride. By the final turn, she was in full command of the race. She streaked off the turn and into the tape, just 3 seconds off the meet record. It sounds like something out of a cheap novel perhaps, but in reality it was the acting out of something she had rehearsed many times. Robin had sprinted the same distance so often in practice, with all different kinds of fatigue factors involved, that she did not panic when her throat closed up. Instead, she ran out the race plan with the confidence that comes from having full knowledge you can function at a winning rate. In discussing the race with Robin afterwards, I asked her about her feelings and sensations. She related to me that she did not feel anything or sense anything for the first 10 laps. As she put it, I was dazed. I suspect the reason was that she did not consciously concern herself with any laps but the target lap. This lightened the load sufficiently for her to run her best ever mile, under the most trying circumstances. I'll review the general procedures we have found useful in developing such a kick. First, establish the distance the kick is going to cover, and the speed. For a person of good speed, a 220 might be advisable. For one with less speed, the kick has to be sustained over a longer distance. The next step is to make the athlete realize he can run at the kick speed and distance. This very simply means giving workouts at the distance in question and at the speed desired, then begin running the kick distance and time when somewhat tired. Gradually increase the degree of fatigue. All of this is pointing toward running the distance and time under as many adverse circumstances in practice as he is likely to encounter in competition. At the point the kick is going to begin, the runner is plagued with quite a lot of stress and pressure to slow down. This requires introducing another factor to buffer the resistance to kicking. We call it the adrenaline point. Every time the athlete passes this point in practice, he is asked to surge or lift the pace a bit. After a while, it becomes something of a reflex action. The decisive factor is giving the runner the necessary confidence to pull the ripcord in a meet of the same point and covering the final distance in the target time.